Hello. So yesterday, we left off when David was mourning the loss of his son Absalom. He was overwhelmed with grief at Absalom's death, but he didn't realize the effect of his behavior on his people. His followers needed proper recognition of their sacrifice for him because they had gone to fight. Absalom was a threat to the kingdom, and his people stood by him. His actions were a disgrace to them, mourning for Absalom so loudly, like that was literally mourning for his enemies. And Joab did a very harsh job of calling him out. Joab's heart was in the right place, but his words and his manner were very harsh. He brutally called David out for his actions, but nevertheless, David followed his advice and went out to the gate, where he officially expressed gratitude to his loyal supporters. The Israelites were in dispute as to reinstating David following Absalom's death. Judah, his tribe, showing the greatest hesitation in doing so. So David sent a message naming Amasa as a replacement for Joab as his commander-in-chief. Now, that was shocking, and this could have been as a result of the resentment of Joab's brutal words to him, or David allowed grief to impair his judgment. And the knock-on effect, but by rewarding the rebel Amasa above a loyal Joab, David allowed grief to impair his judgment, because why would he do that? And the knock-off effect was an increased jealousy between Israel and Judah, his people, because there was an argument as per who owned David, who had more right to David, and so on and so forth. Now, we come back to Shimei. Remember Shimei, who was insulting David as he was fleeing. He came back to seek for mercy, and David graciously granted him mercy because, from what I understood, the punishment for insulting the king, the Lord's anointed, was death. But David said that he shouldn't live, he shouldn't die. He says it's the day of rejoicing. He wasn't going to kill anyone, so he showed him mercy. Ziba. Remember Ziba and the Mephibosheth story? Here is where we found out what really happened. Ziba was revealed to have double-crossed Mephibosheth and left him behind. His appearance showed that, and this was Mephibosheth's appearance when he came to David, showed that he had been mourning since David left Jerusalem. He hadn't shaved and he was looking dirty, and pointed towards his innocence, but David decided to divide Saul's estate between them. Now, personally, I thought that wasn't fair, but Mephibosheth on his own hand felt like he just said, anything, he was just grateful to not have been seen as a traitor. And because David had given his word to Ziba, he didn't want to reverse it, so he says they should share it equally, and Mephibosheth saw it as more than even generosity. The question or the quarrel over who David belonged to by the Israelites and Judah was evidence of the underlying tensions that existed between them. The men of Judah defended him more than the men of Israel, and for this cause, Sheba started a rebellion. A Benjamites, no doubt. So we've already established Benjamites are aggressive, don't need anything to make them go to war and to go and fight and to rebel. And then obviously this was the descendant of Saul, so we know that there was no love lost between him and Judah. The 10 concubines that Absalom defied publicly caused David shame, but they were victims of Absalom's lawlessness, and David still cared for them, but put them in seclusion till their death, because they were basically still his, but then he didn't want to drive them away, but then they couldn't remarry or whatever, so they just live like widows. I thought that was really sad. Sheba's revolt exposed Amasa as unfit to lead David's army of Judah, because he was hesitating when David asked him to amass the troops. David was probably still holding a grudge against Joab, because he called Abishai his brother when he was like, okay, if Amasa isn't doing it, normally he would have called Joab. Well, it should have been Joab in the first place. to fight when Amasa was slow. But Joab, despite his sins, always remained loyal to David. And he killed Amasa. He joined his brother, and he went after Sheba to the city of Abel when Sheba escaped there. The wise woman of Abel displayed boldness and insight to avert disaster. This was when Sheba fled into the city, and they were willing to bring the city down just to get him out. The city was known as a mother, in Israel, a place where disputes were settled peaceably. And so she, did the wise thing and sent Sheba's head over the wall. It's like, Sheba, you have to go, not you for our city. In verse 20, in chapter 21, the Gibeonites, remember them? They were the remnants of the Amorites, those ones who had deceived Joshua, did like they had come from far away and made a treaty with them, right? Under fraudulent circumstances, of course. Saul had broken the promise to the Amorites by the treaty, by killing them, and God now caused a 3-year famine as a result. Now, when crime goes punished, the whole land suffers and the whole land is polluted. We know that from Numbers 35-33. So David asked the Gibeonites for their terms of restitution, and they requested 7 sons of Saul's descendants, or 7 of Saul's descendants, that they may publicly execute them. When someone is killed, right, their bodies were to be buried the same day. No, that was one of the commands, but no one did that for these 7 sons of Saul. And by the way, David didn't put up Mephibosheth at all. And then he was, so Rizpah, Saul's concubine, assumed the responsibility of protecting the bodies until the rains came. So that, rain coming probably meant the end of the famine. So it was satisfying, signifying the end of the famine. And she just made sure that, she honored them. And David honored the memory of Saul and Jonathan by taking them along with the bones of the 7 sons and burying them in their family tomb. The chapter concluded with tales of war and victories over giants. David was almost killed by one, and his men decided that no longer will he go out to war with them. He was thereby protected while his men went out to fight. Now, here's where I saw God in these chapters. God cares about justice to be done to every man, even cities like the Gibeonites. Even in cities like the Gibeonites, even though they were sort of enemy states, but God cared about justice for them because Saul had actually gone against the treaty. He takes sin very seriously, no matter who is on the committing end or the receiving end, and he works to bring his justice in the matter, no matter what. So it made me think that even as a child of God, if I sin against someone else, I should expect, justice, and vice versa. So this showed us that God wasn't partial towards the Israelites as to say, oh, because they are my people and Saul did this, I wouldn't. But he did. He fought, for the Gibeonites. And I think that's just amazing to know. Thank you for joining me today. Tomorrow we'll go back to the Psalms, and I look forward to seeing you here. Have a good day. Bye.